There's another poll recently. Overwhelming majority of people said that their U.S. senator would sell them out for a campaign contribution. People don't believe in this process anymore. They have delinked from it. They have disconnected from it. And we expect them to come and vote in it. We expect them to participate in it. Why? Why would they believe that they should do that when we've given them so many signals to go away? When we then, anybody who does think they might come vote, we feed them all these negative ads. I know it's hard what we're asking you to do over the next few years, to continue to work so hard on these constitutional amendment issues. But I want to tell you why you must do it. How do we fill that room? How do we open the door to that room? We didn't want the slave, I did, but the people of power didn't want the slaves in. They didn't want the women in. They didn't want the people of color, the religious dissenters, the poor in that room. How do we get them in that room? Well, we fought a civil war. Civil War wasn't about keeping Mississippi in the Union. For people from Wisconsin, the Civil War was about ending the original sin of the American experiment and ending human bondage in this country. That's what the Civil War was about. And when we sent those kids south from Wisconsin, when they came from Milwaukee County and Waukesha County and Jefferson County and Racine and Kenosha, when they went down to fight, they didn't get the frontline jobs. They weren't the generals. The Wisconsinites, they got put in the rough and unpleasant places because they were in iron brigades. They were ready to fight harder than anybody else. And if you remember that battle at Lookout Mountain, anybody who's ever been to Lookout Mountain, you look up that mountain, it's straight up. The Confederate cannons were on the top. The Union soldiers were on the bottom. Well, U.S. Grant, his people, they looked up that mountain. They said, we can't take that. That's impossible. But that mountain extends out beyond. That was the line you had to cross to break into the deep south, to begin to take the battle against slavery to the place where it mattered most, to end the original sin. Now that missionary ridge that stretched out beyond Lookout Mountain, that's where the kids from Wisconsin were at. They were down at the bottom of them. And the word came down the line and said, we can't take this hill. We're not going to be able to take Lookout Mountain. And the Wisconsinites down there at the bottom of Missionary Ridge, they said, well, if you're not going to try, we're going to try. It matters that much to us. And so the first Wisconsinites went over a little berm and they went out into the open starting to go up that hill. There was a flag bearer. He got shot and killed almost immediately. Another kid ran out and grabbed the flag. He was decapitated by a cannonball. Third kid came out, kid in his teens, early 20s, from Milwaukee, grabbed that flag and he started running up the hill. It was a Wisconsin flag. And he started running up that hill and he took a shot in his shoulder and he took a shot in his leg and he kept running to the top of that hill. And when Arthur MacArthur got to the top of that hill, he planted that flag and he yelled at the top of his lungs, on Wisconsin. And the Wisconsinites poured over those ridges and started running up that hill. They did not run into that Confederate fire simply to do a structural organizational thing to keep the Union together. They came from the state of Wisconsin to end the sin of slavery, and they poured over that hill. They broke the line and said to the rest of the Union Army, we're going into the South to take this thing apart. That's who Wisconsinites are. And the fact of the matter is, how many here saw the movie Lincoln? Okay? What were they debating about in Lincoln? What were they debating about in Lincoln? How were they going to make that sacrifice real? What they were debating about was a constitutional amendment to give the right to vote to African Americans. No, their answer to all of that struggle was a constitutional amendment. Don, are we going to get you a chair here or not? We got to get you a chair. Yeah, this is Don Richards, who is one of your greatest city council members ever here. One of the best people. Don, the one guy who actually still knows Frank Zeidler. So brothers and sisters, this isn't going to take long here. When they got when they got over there and they got that constitutional amendment and they gave African Americans the right to vote. And remember, first African Americans elected to Congress, they didn't come up in the 1960s, they came up in the 1860s and 1870s from southern states where the United States government made sure that African Americans had a right to vote. Would that the United States government was doing that today instead of allowing voter ID laws and all these barriers and suppression of our votes. Well, you know, women took a look at that and they said, hold it. You're telling me all we need is a constitutional amendment and we got a right to vote? Well, we've been organized on this for a while. We want our constitutional amendment too. And women started to make that demand. And you know, I was at this great university out east recently. And I was talking about all this stuff. And a young man, he raised his hand and he said, Mr. Nichols, you're talking about amending the Constitution to get money out of politics, things like that. You're talking about amending the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College, things like that. He says, those are hard. That's not easy like getting votes for women. And I love that young man because it made no sense to him that a woman didn't have a right to vote. That's a victory for the good guys. That's the right thing that you think you can't imagine not giving women the right to vote. But here's the deal. It didn't come easy. Women suffered and struggled and died for that right to vote, and they got it. And you know, when women got the right to vote, Native Americans started to say, hold it. We were here first. And it wasn't until the 1920s that they started extending meaningful voting rights to Native Americans. It wasn't until the 1940s in some of our southwestern states that they started extending meaningful voting rights to Latinos, to Asian Americans in some of our western states. Slowly but surely we started knocking down these barriers, started moving toward a Voting Rights Act, toward a Civil Rights Act, making real the promise of those sacrifices. But do you know when we eliminated the barrier to vote based on your wealth, based on your income, based on what you had in your pocket, the money barrier to voting? 1964. Within the lifetime of a lot of people in this room, that's when we voted to strike down that wealth barrier. And you know how we did it? Constitutional amendment. One of the last things John Kennedy was doing was calling around the country, getting people to back that constitutional amendment. He went to Texas. John Kennedy was in Texas 3 weeks after Texans voted on a poll tax referendum. The fact of the matter is, Kennedy was consumed in the last months of his life with trying to end the poll tax, that barrier to the indentured servant, that barrier to the person with the wealth. And you know what happened? After we started to knock those barriers down, young people that were fighting in Vietnam, they started to say, hold it. You mean constitutional amendment, we can get African Americans to vote, we can get women to vote, we can knock down the wealth barrier to voting? Well, you know what? We'd like to have a say about whether we're sent off to die in the battlefields of Southeast Asia. We think 18 to 21-year-olds should have the vote, and we did a constitutional amendment to give them the vote as well.
In 6 months.
In 6 months. Brothers and sisters, are you starting to get a theme here? I know we've been through a rough couple years. I know it's hard stuff. But none of these victories have been easy. But the fact of the matter is, every time this country has been in crisis, and we are in a political and electoral and structural crisis today, good people have rallied to amend the Constitution of the United States. And that is why I come here tonight to commiserate with you, to talk about what has been won and what has been lost, but mostly to celebrate your victories in this community for Move to Amend, because the truth of the matter is, you are carrying on that great arc of history. You are doing that great progressive act. You are making real the promise of the American experiment, because there is not a choice. It's not, oh, maybe we should do this or maybe we should do that. There is one answer to the crisis we are in, and that answer is that we are going to have to go town by town, county by county, state by state, until we get the great mass of Americans on our side, until we are so overwhelming that, like those kids at Missionary Ridge, we can run into the fire of those negative ads, of those billions of dollars. We can break through that line and enact a constitutional amendment that says money is not speech, Corporations are not people. And we, the people of these United States, have a right to organize elections in which our votes matter more than their dollars. We're going to do it. It's going to come from Wisconsin. It's going to come from states across this country. And brothers and sisters, when we win that fight, and it will not be long, we are going to say, we were gathered at Berks Castle on one of the worst damn nights of our politics, and we did